Let's jump over right now to what I find the most fascinating, because I like to talk about the financial world is changing, and it's changing rapidly. And I've been saying this for a while now, and now we're actually seeing it, because when they let a certain genie out of the bottle, they can't put it back in. So first of all, we've always known in my world that the biggest weapons that the Americans have, it's the financial weapons. It's not the Navy and all that stuff, which is incredibly powerful, by the way. Nothing can top the American Navy. However, what happened when they first started putting sanctions on the Russians a couple of weeks ago? Remember Biden said, no, we're not going to cut them off SWIFT. We're not going to do that, because he knew, or his advisors said, no, we can't do that. That's really going to change the world dramatically. And then something happened overnight. All of a sudden, I think it was Germany, the Italians, and I forget the other country. Did they finally accept it? Yeah, we'll do it. So with the Russians now, these are the list of things that we talked about last week, and they are happening. So the Russians, we have the sanctions taking place. Putin is now on the sanction list. He wasn't before. The Russians, a lot of their banks have been cut off from the SWIFT dollar system or network. By the way, they can still trade oil on it, apparently. Central bank assets have been frozen by the Central Bank of Russia. Russian equities have been removed from all MSCI indices. And that might sound boring, but for all these ETFs you buy from emerging markets, any kind of investment held in Russia, that's now sold. It just has to go out by law. It's an incredibly powerful tool, because when that's in place, and this is one way the Chinese get a lot of capital, by the way. So their companies are included in the MSCI index because they lobbied for that when they entered the WTO back like 20 years ago, whatever it was. All of a sudden then, like every day, like there's tens of millions of dollars in capital investment flowing into China. Anyway, the Russians just got shut out of that. So now all of a sudden, credit ratings on any kind of Russian-related debt, they've been downgraded or with no rating. That means that pension funds are no longer allowed to hold this stuff. Russians can no longer do any equity or debt sales in the U.S., and even the Swiss banks have frozen assets from certain Russian individuals. And for the Swiss to do that, again, it's pretty big. So, I know I just droned on and on, but.
Wait, can I just chime in really quickly here?
Yeah.
You forgot the most important one. Roman Abramovich had to sell Chelsea Football Club.
I didn't see that. Yeah. Well, for everyone else, we're gamers, right? Hey, yeah, wow, that's crazy, but that's an enormous asset. I don't know who's going to buy it, but we'll
the Saudis.
See. Well, I mean, the Saudis are up in arms today, right? Because of the Iranians might have their the sanctions lifted against them. So everything here is connected, and even if there's a resolution this afternoon to the war, it's highly unlikely all these sanctions are going to be lifted. The Russians will be turned back on to SWIFT and all that stuff. And again, this is the financial weapon. So I've said numerous times now in writings, interviews, and all this stuff, the most powerful, if the Americans want to turn off the Chinese economy, they can do it within 10 days. They just cut them out of the SWIFT dollar system, specifically Hong Kong and specifically HSBC, because that's where they get their dollars, all flowing through HSBC. And this is now confirmation to the world that, hey, now they can do it, because it's happened with the Russians. It's not as severe economically for the world with it happening to Russia. If it happened with the Chinese, then yeah, it's an insane moment coming up. But now that's hanging out there. That's out there now in the world, and the Chinese are aware of it. And anyone else, so the Americans say, hey, if you're not on our team, it means you're on the other team. And, we can cut you off financially. So again, I'm just going to stress, this is an enormous week for this, and it's not going to change coming up.
Can I just ask a question, Keith? I mean, does this accelerate China's desire to pull away from the U.S. with respect to the, all these funding markets, whether it's dollar trades, whether it's the petrodollar, you know what I mean? People have talked about the Petro Yuan in the past. Do you think that's bogus, or do you think that accelerates all of these trends to kind of de-link and disconnect the Chinese financial and sort of trade credit markets to the US and Europe?
I mean, the petrol ruble won.
You're gonna have to think of a better
Don't
name
start.
for it.
Don't start.
No, but honestly, I know
it.
we're joking, but I mean, if you're Xi Jinping, you've just got to. You've been like you've almost certainly been startled by the speed and the effectiveness of this, frankly, act of war. And I was just wondering if you thought that the Chinese will take pause, or will they accelerate their plans, or is it all BS? And
so I love that question. Like Steve's question earlier wasn't very good, but you just answer it anyway. But this is a much better question. So one thing I didn't mention though with Russia, there are bank runs now. People are scrambling to get US
lines
dollars.
at the ATMs. There's lines at the ATMs.
Yeah, like
and then Bitcoin jumped. People
going
argue
into crypto. You hear that, Keith?
Yeah, like crypto, it was jumping up. But everyone, like even today, for example, and you got to take everything with half a grain of salt as well. But there are rumors in Russia tonight that they're going to impose martial law, and any male 18 or over, they have to stay in the country, and then they can be conscripted into the army. So
because people are leaving. There's flights out of Turkish Airlines has seen huge amounts of flights out of Russia.
Yeah. So again, life has changed dramatically, and that's not going to get reversed. However, this is resolved. Financial markets will reverse aggressively. I'm a true believer in that. But back to the other question about the Chinese. So first of all, no one likes the current system. It's a system that just evolved. And the reason it evolved was because when World War II was over, and during that time, everyone in the world, they all moved their assets to America. Because America, even though they were heavily involved in the war, there's not one shot was fired in the US, right? The US it's physically imposing. No one can attack it and all that. And that's why all the wealth has stayed there. All the loans after World War II to get things going, they all went through the US, American institutions and all that. So here we are now, like years later, and it's grown into this behemoth where there's no alternative, Rich. So they want an alternative, and everyone's wanted one for a long time, but no one's been able to create one. So this does accelerate the desire to have one, because the Chinese are absolutely sitting there saying, holy smokes, if they turn off the SWIFT system, or you guys don't even know this, okay? So HSBC, for example, they were caught laundering money for one of the largest Mexican drug cartels. And so this was back in the 2014 or 16, agreeing, whatever they went through in the end.
It showed up in Kitsilano.
There's a great Netflix special, by the way, called Dirty Money, and they explain the whole thing. Is fascinating. It's wild how no one went to prison. Anyway,
it's incredible. Yeah, absolutely. So like if you or Steve laundered money for any kind of drug cartel, you're in prison. That's where you go. If you're running a banking institution, you lose.
You get promoted. You get promoted.
Yeah, but jokes aside, I mean but HSBC, they paid a fine. And then they establish all of these other red lines. And if you cross any of the red lines, you are now going to have criminal prosecutions and you're going to lose your American banking license. They've already crossed a lot of these red lines, and the American institutions have still not acted upon that. They have the legal right to do it. The Trump administration, they went close several times to doing it. Every time they're about to do it, they were told by Treasury, don't do it, because it instantly causes a collapse in Hong Kong, which then drains everything out of China as well. And so for those that don't know, so Hong Kong, for example, HSBC, their business is basically split between the Chinese business and then outside of China, and they're in a really hard place there a couple of years ago, because they were told, the Western world said, hey, if you do any business with the Chinese, you guys are going to go to jail, you're going to lose your license. And the Chinese told them, hey, if you do this, you're going to lose your access to Chinese and Hong Kong markets. So these poor guys are sitting there saying, what do you do? Like two extremely powerful groups on each side of you. So what the HSBC did, they've actually sided with the Chinese, So they'll continue to do everything that they've done before. But the threat is there now. So, and the Chinese are aware of that. And because the Americans have turned off the Russians from the access to capital markets, they're able to do that now without having any remorse. They're saying, wow, we did it to the Russians. And again, that's not impacting the financial world. If they do it to the Chinese, it's going to hurt everyone. Like, we're all going to feel this one.
But Keith, isn't this something you can only really do once? Like, does that make sense? I mean, I know you could probably do it to Hungary or, Australia, or frankly, other countries that don't frankly really matter. Canada, if the US wanted to kick Canada off SWIFT, I mean, some rough, maybe, Justin Trudeau would do something, I don't know, eat a donut or something, who knows? But my point is, this is sort of something you can only really do once, isn't it? I mean, yeah. So they fired their shot.
So if you do it once, I mean, you can't turn it back on, right? So that's why it's a very heavy-handed response by the Americans if they do it. And again, this has been known for a while. The State Department are aware, with Treasury Department, the Fed, the CIA.
But that's sorry to interrupt you, but that's isn't that the point why, in a way, it was sort of? I mean, isn't it more useful to hold it as a deterrent? Do you know what I mean? To extract concessions before you execute on this plan, rather than to just, because now, not to get into geopolitics, but now Russia's kicked out. So what the hell do they care, right? Do they, now they're just going to push through with what they wanted to do anyways, if that makes sense.
Well, again, I think the Russian situation is something happened. We won't find out about months, years down the road. Something happened very abruptly behind the scenes, because the Americans said, no, we are not going to sanction Putin, and we're not going to cut the Russians off the SWIFT system. And again, I think oil is still trading, so you don't have to, that capital is still moving, but the Russians are struggling to get something set up, because again, they've lost access to capital markets. That's the big thing. And to answer your question, I mean, with regards to China, it's been dangling there for a while. I mean, there's no secrets. I mean, if the Loonie Hour is talking about it, I mean, we're smart guys and everything, but no offense, guys. I mean,
how dare you?
How dare you? Yeah, everyone else is aware of it as well. It's there, but everything. The reason they're dangling over the Chinese, whether it's for what happened with genocide over there, or taking freedoms away from Hong Kong, intellectual property theft. I mean, you can go on and on and on, and they haven't stopped, right? So, but again, we'll just see where it goes. So if it does happen, the effect on Canadians is financial markets will get thumped, but the dollar would just scream higher.
US dollar, you mean?
US dollar tightening, ultimately, tightening of general market liquidity conditions.
So if this weekend, if they turned off SWIFT from the Chinese for whatever reason, and again, everyone, this is not happening this weekend, so don't run out and say the Loonie Hour said this is going to happen. But the main dollar index, the DXY index, is about 98 right now this morning. On Monday morning, that thing would open up at about 125, 150. It won't even be priced. Yeah. So the other thing, we talked, for example, energy is screaming higher now. What's the worst performing currency market right now, besides ruble, of course? It's euro. So euro is underperforming the Turkish lira right now, right? So again, we know Europe is screwed, but if energy screams higher, and they're getting cut off from getting, Russian energy and all that stuff. Again, everything is connected here.
I think we should thank all the green.
Sorry. Yeah.
Don't go. No, go.
I was gonna say, has the Canadian dollar been relatively underperforming right now as well, which is, somewhat eye-opening, all things considered, because considering, our commodity based nation here. Yeah,
Canadian dollar's done quite well, actually, guys, because it's getting a bit of support here with oil going higher.
Don't you think it should be arguably?
It's definitely disconnected. There's been a decoupling in the dollar, but no, you're right to point that out. I mean, over the last couple of days, I haven't really paid attention to it, but over the last 6 months, as the dollar has ratcheted higher and higher, and the U.S. interest rate expectations have gone into the stratosphere. I mean, You've definitely seen the dollar starting to lag the price of crude oil. And I mean, there are different arguments for why this is happening. I think it's largely a function of the fact that Canadians will not be able to raise interest rates anywhere near as much as the US, for a bunch of reasons we've covered on this podcast before. But yeah, you're right, Steve, just to point out that there's definitely been it's disconnected from oil in a little bit.
That's where we end it, right there on the Canadian dollar.